What if Ned Stark never walked into the Great Sept that day? What if instead of meeting his executioner's sword, he vanished like a whisper in the wind, southbound, not north, running from the very city that condemned him? Imagine this, the man once bound by honor breaking it for the sake of survival. But what if I told you that dishonor would lead him to a crown? Ned Stark's breath was ragged as the cart rumbled over dry stone roads far from King's Landing, far from Sansa's screams and Arya's unknown fate. The red walls of the capital faded behind him like a memory swallowed by fire. He was supposed to die, his bones buried under the weight of betrayal. But Varys had whispered quicker than the sword could fall. "You want your daughters to live? Then vanish, trust me, and run." And for once Ned listened, not to honor but to instinct. And maybe to vengeance. Okay, pause. You probably expected Ned Stark to choose death. That's what he always does, right? Duty over life, honor over strategy. But here's where it gets insane, this version of Ned. He chooses life. And life changes everything. The desert heat was blinding as he crossed the Stormlands under the guise of a merchant guard, face hidden, hair chopped short. Each mile south pulled him deeper into lands where his name meant less. Stark was just another forgotten word. His past just a ghost. But word of a northern man fleeing the crown spread faster than wildfire. And somewhere deep in Sunspear, a viper began to listen. Oberyn Martell didn't trust many, and he certainly didn't believe in second chances. But he did believe in enemies of the Lannisters. When whispers reached him that Ned Stark, the hand once betrayed, had fled execution and disappeared into the south, he grew curious. Not because he wanted to help, but because he wanted revenge too. "You expect me to believe the Honorable Wolf grew a tail and ran?" Oberyn hissed, pouring himself Dornish red. "Or is this just another ghost story from the Reach?" The spy shrugged. "He's alive, and headed here." Meanwhile, Ned found shelter in the unlikeliest place, a small outpost of Dornish farmers, survivors of the last border war. Their leader, a widow named Melira, gave him water, then gave him a name, John of the Rocks. He didn't correct her. Let the North believe he was dead. Let the South forget what he looked like. In this dry, brutal land, names didn't save you. Steel did. But here's where the real shift begins. You'd expect Ned to lay low, to wait. Maybe to find a ship back north. But what happens next flips the board. Because Melira wasn't just a farmer. She was a cousin to the Martells, and she saw something in him. Not just a broken man, but a symbol. A man wronged by the same Lannisters who burned her kin. And in Dorne, grudges are a religion. Dorne doesn't need peace, she told him one night as sandstorms raged outside. It needs a new blade. A different crown. One that doesn't smell of Lannisport gold. Ned shook his head. "I'm not a king. I was barely a lord. But you've fought for one. You've bled for one. And you were nearly killed for protecting the true heir. That means something. And it did." The story of Ned Stark the Exile began to stir fires in the desert. Exiled lords, discontented princes. Even the sand snakes whispered of rebellion. And for the first time in decades, Dorne didn't just burn with heat. It burned with purpose. Now here's where your jaw should drop. Because while Ned built a secret alliance in the dunes, Cersei Lannister believed him dead. Joffrey sat on the throne, Sansa broken in his grip, Arya still lost. Robb Stark marched to war, blind to the truth that his father still breathed. And the Seven Kingdoms teetered on chaos, but Dawn began to move. Ned met Oberyn in secret. The Viper didn't smile. He rarely did when it mattered. But he offered something no northern man had ever been given before. Legitimacy in Dorne. A seat. A title. Maybe even a crown. But only if Ned could promise one thing, war. "You want vengeance?" Oberyn asked him, dagger spinning in his fingers. "I want justice. You bring me the head of Tywin Lannister. You raise this desert with swords. And I'll raise you as our king." Ned hesitated. His heart screamed no, this wasn't who he was. But then he remembered Sansa's tears. Arya's last glimpse. Robb's doomed war. And he nodded. "I'll bring the storm." Wait, what? Did that just happen? Ned Stark, the most honorable man in Westeros, just agreed to lead a Dornish rebellion. Against the crown, yeah. And it only gets wilder from here. As months passed, secret camps filled with deserters. Wildlings smuggled through Blackmont passes. Even exiled Targaryen loyalists still hiding in Essos, because here's the twist. Ned's alliance wasn't just Dornish. It was royal. Remember Jon Snow's parentage? Yeah, Ned knew. And in the depths of the Dornish stronghold, he began to plan something no one saw coming. Not just war. A restoration. He's not my bastard, Ned whispered to Melira one night. He's their son, Lyanna and Rhaegar's. He should be the one on the throne. And just like that, a new mission was born. Not just revenge on the Lannisters. Not just vengeance for the North, but the rise of Jon Targaryen, a king born of fire and frost. Dorne would be the cradle of his power. Ned Stark would be his sword, and the realm, it would burn before it bent again. Meanwhile, ravens flew. Varys heard whispers he couldn't confirm. The North began to hear songs of a southern king. Not Baratheon, not Targaryen, not Lannister, but a wolf in the sands. And in King's Landing, Cersei began to dream of wolves. You still with me? Because we're only just beginning. Ned Stark is alive. Dorne is ready to rise. And a war unlike any Westeros has ever seen is coming. Not just for the throne, but for the soul of the realm. The throne, but for the soul of the realm. The Dornish sun scorched the sky as ravens took flight in every direction, carrying a message written in no royal hand, sealed not with wax, but blood. The realm believed Ned Stark was dead. But now in the deep dunes of Dorne a new storm gathered. And its name wasn't Baratheon, or Targaryen, or Lannister. It was Stark, and it came wrapped in silence, in shadows, and in the fury of a kingdom long forgotten by the Iron Throne. Robb Stark stood at the war table in River Run, his eyes scanning over reports from scouts, when one rider arrived half dead from the south. His horse collapsed before the gates. The man's skin peeled from sunburn, but his voice, cracked and raw, delivered one name that turned Robb's blood to ice. Your father. Lives. There was no joy. Only silence, no cheers. Only disbelief. Robb grabbed the man by the tunic. Say it again. He's in Dorne, building an army. Wait. Pause. You're telling me Robb, who's already declared himself king in the north, who sacrificed thousands in war, is now told that the very cause of his war, his father's death, never happened. Yeah, that's the kind of moment that breaks kings or makes them. And Robb doesn't flinch. He explodes. He lied to me? His voice tore through the hall. Catelyn tried to calm him, but her voice trembled. He did it to protect you. All of you. But Robb's honor was carved from the same stone as his father's. He felt betrayed, angry, but beneath all that, relief. His father was alive, and that meant everything else could change. And far south, in the sun-washed stone halls of Sunspear, Ned Stark stood before hundreds of Dornish rebels, exiled knights, Martell loyalists, and even a few Targaryen sympathizers. His words echoed across the crowd like war drums. I am not your king, he said, but I will fight for the one who should be. And with that a banner was raised. Golden red with a flaming sword crossed behind a direwolf, a house that had never existed in Westeros until now. The rebellion of the Desert Wolf had begun. But here's where it gets even crazier. Tyrion Lannister, now Hand of the King under Joffrey's rule, received word of movement in Dorne, reports of strange alliances, missing soldiers, Martell forces rearming. But the most damning? A Stark was alive. Tyrion didn't panic. He poured wine, sat back, and whispered to Varys, You knew, didn't you? Varys only smiled. I know many things, including which way the wind blows, but what does he want? Justice, Varys said. Which means you should be afraid. Meanwhile, Jon Snow stood on the wall staring at the horizon with ghosts in his eyes. He didn't know the truth of his blood yet, but he felt something stirring in his veins, a pull, a voice in the wind. Then came the letter, written in his father's hand, carried by a crow that should never have made it through the mountains. You are more than you know. Come south. The time has come for truth. He read it 10 times. Jon had always believed his father would never lie. But now, that belief was being tested, and somewhere deep inside a storm began to churn. All right, let's talk Dorne. Oberyn Martell wasn't done with vengeance. His daughters, the Sand Snakes, became Ned's shadow operatives. They spread chaos across the Reach, hitting Lannister supply lines, bribing bannermen, cutting the legs out from under Tywin's war machine. And guess who they turned next? Renly Baratheon, yup, the smiling pretender who thought a golden crown would fall into his lap. Oberyn met him near the Stormlands, smiled, drank, and then offered him a deal. Back our king, he said. Not Joffrey, not Stannis. A true heir, one who unites the realm. You do this, and we don't burn your castles to the ground. Renly, ever the opportunist, laughed it off. Who is this mystery king of yours? You? Oberyn smirked. Not me, a boy born of ice and fire. And boom, Jon Snow's name was whispered in Storm's End for the first time. Let's not forget the Lannisters. Cersei's grip on the throne tightened. She could feel it, power slipping like sand through her fingers. And Tywin? Oh, Tywin was furious. He summoned his generals. Dorne moves like a snake. Find its head. Cut it. But he underestimated one thing. Ned Stark wasn't the same man he was in King's Landing. The Dorne had changed him, made him harder, colder, strategic, and for the first time in his life, ruthless. His army didn't march to banners and horns. It crept like shadow, poisoned wells, crushed supply lines, stirred rebellion from within Lannister lands, and guess who else joined him? Beric Dondarrion. The Brotherhood without banners began slipping into the Westerlands, razing villages, burning tax houses, preaching rebellion. And they carried a new chant. The North remembers. The South rises. Tell me that doesn't send chills down your spine. Back in the North, Robb stood at a crossroads. Join his father's southern campaign, risk being seen as a traitor to his own cause, or continue his war and face both Tywin and Ned as enemies. He called his bannermen. The vote was split. The Great Jon roared, "The boy's our king. Let his father stay in the sand." But others whispered of unity, of strength. In the end, it was Catelyn who decided, "We have lost too much already. If my husband lives, we must follow." And just like that, the North began to turn. Jon Snow, meanwhile, rode south under cover of darkness. Ghost at his side, his heart pounding with questions. Who was he really? Why now? But what he found in Sunspear wasn't just family. It was destiny. Ned met him in the Temple of the Sun, alone. "You are not my bastard," he said, voice cracking. "You are the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark." Jon didn't speak. He couldn't. The world shattered beneath him. "But you are still my son," Ned said. "And now? You are the heir to the 7 kingdoms, and just like that, everything changed. Again, you still watching? Because we're heading toward a full-on civil war, but not the one you remember. Not Stannis versus Renly, not North versus South. This is Targaryen reborn. Stark unleashed, Martell rising. All against the Golden Lions of King's Landing. What happens next will break the realm in two. What happens next will break the realm in two. The Raven landed on the cracked stone walls of King's Landing at dawn, its wings soaked in desert dust. A golden scroll clutched in its claw, unmarked by any official seal, only a single word scrawled across the parchment in sharp, furious ink: vengeance. Cersei crushed it in her fist before even reading. She knew what it meant. Dawn was coming. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was how far the rot had already spread inside the walls of her own city. In the shadows of Flea Bottom, whispers rose like smoke from burning secrets. Dornish agents disguised as merchants, gold cloaks paid in foreign coin, silent sisters who weren't so silent anymore. The rebellion had already breached the gates, and it wore no armor. It didn't need to. Fear was its weapon now. Tyrion was the first to sense it. He watched from the balcony of the Red Keep as the harbor swelled with foreign ships under false flags. Grain from the Reach, wine from the arbor. But something was off. Too many ships, too few records. And then came the name. Carved into a crate smuggled through the docks. Stark. "Oh gods," Tyrion muttered. "He's already here. Wait, what? Did you catch that? Ned Stark hasn't just built an army. He's infiltrated the capital before the first sword is even drawn. This isn't just war. It's a coup." In the south, Jon Snow stood on the burning sands of Ironwood, where the first full camp of Dornish and northern bannermen trained under a single banner. His hand still trembled from the truth of his birth, but his voice had never been stronger. "We do not fight for thrones," he told them. "We fight for those who cannot fight back. We fight for the ones crushed under gold boots. We fight because we must," they roared for him. They knelt. And when he turned, even the sand snakes bent the knee, not to a Targaryen, but to him. Ned watched from the ridge, his face unreadable. This was the boy he'd raised, the secret he'd buried for decades, and now, his greatest weapon. "You will lead them," Ned said that night. "Not me." Jon's face twisted in confusion. "They follow you." "No, they follow the idea of justice. And that isn't me anymore. My name is tied to the past. Yours is a future. Let's flip back to the north for a second. Robb Stark had made his choice. He sent ravens to every loyal house. Ride south. Our father lives. The north would not abandon blood. Not again, but not every bannerman agreed. Rose Bolton, cold as ever, refused the call. The boy is no longer my king, he told his son. The realm needs strength, not old ghosts. You know what that means. The Boltons break from the Starks earlier, but instead of stabbing Robb at a wedding, they ride straight to King's Landing. Tywin welcomes them like hounds he knows how to chain. But here's the part that cracks the board wide open. Daenerys Targaryen receives word in Korth. 3 names. Ned Stark, Jon Snow, Rhaegar's son, her blood chills. She thought she was the last, the only, and now? You mean I have a nephew? Ser Jorah looked just as stunned. If the reports are true, she stared into the fire. Then the throne may not be mine at all. But she doesn't retreat. She prepares. Fire and blood doesn't back down, it claims, and now you've got 3 royal claimants. Joffrey the Pretender. Jon the Hidden Heir. Daenerys the Dragon Queen. Tell me that's not the most volatile powder keg Westeros has ever seen. Meanwhile, inside King's Landing, Tyrion plays a double game. He begins feeding false information to Cersei, delaying her strategies, stalling the war machine. Why? Because he's betting on something no one else is, that Ned Stark might actually win. I saw how the realm fell apart under Robert, he says to Varys one night, and I see now, Ned Stark wasn't the problem. He was the answer. Varys nods, and yet we cut off his head. We tried, Tyrion replies, raising his cup, and like all good legends, he refused to stay dead. But the calm before the storm ends when a wildfire cache explodes beneath the Shadow Market, triggered by a single torch thrown by a Dornish agent. Flames ripple through the alleys. Dozens die. Panic spreads. And the message is clear. The capital is no longer safe. Cersei loses it. Burn the gates if you must, she screams. No more mercy. And Tywin, usually calm, starts moving troops into the Red Keep itself. He knows what's coming. And so do we. You still with me? Because now we enter the war phase. And it's not just between 2 sides anymore. It's for Dorne and the North under Jon Snow, the Iron Throne under Joffrey, the traitor Bolton siding with Tywin, and Daenerys watching from the east with dragons on her shoulder. Every raven that flies now carries the weight of a kingdom's fate. Jon leads the vanguard north of Blackwater Bay, sand snakes ahead of him, wildlings freed by his order, flanking both sides. When he arrives outside the gates, he sends no herald, no message. Only silence, then a horn once, twice, 3 times, the North remembers. Ned rides beside him, but only to observe. His armor dark, his face unreadable. For all the love he has for his son, he knows this is no longer his war. Inside the city, Joffrey panics. Send the mountain, he shrieks. Crush them. But the mountain doesn't move. Why? Because he's already dead. Poisoned 3 nights earlier by Oberyn Martell. Yup. You didn't think he was going to wait for a trial, did you? Cersei screams. Tywin stares, and then the gates open, not from battle but from within. The Goldcloaks switch sides. The rebellion walks through the gates like ghosts, returned from the grave. Tyrion meets Ned at the steps of the Red. Keep their eyes lock. You're taller than I remember. Tyrion mutters. You're drunker than I expected, Ned replies. Tension breaks, but only for a breath. Because at the Iron Throne, Joffrey stands alone and Jon Snow enters, his sword drawn. The boy king tries to scream for his guards, but no one answers. And here's where it all flips. Jon doesn't kill him, he lowers his sword. Let him live. Let the realm see what cowardice looks like. The realm watches, and that moment breaks the Lannister myth. Power is taken, not given, and in that instant, the Game of Thrones resets. But oh, it's not over. Daenerys lands in Dragonstone, and her dragons are hungry. You want part 4? Because next time, dragons meet wolves, and fire meets frost, and only one bloodline will survive. Drop your comments, smash that like, and get ready. Because Westeros is about to choose between the fire that burns and the frost that endures, that burns and the frost that endures. The waves slammed into the black shores of Dragonstone as the wind howled through ancient battlements, long untouched by royal feet. Smoke curled from the cliffs, not from firewood, but from the nostrils of a dragon. Drogon's wings unfurled like sails catching the wind. Behind him, Rhaegal landed with a screech that echoed across the narrow sea. Daenerys Targaryen stepped down from the beast's back, boots hitting stone, silver hair whipping in the wind. She had come home. But Westeros no longer belonged to her alone. News reached her even before her dragons touched Westerosi soil. Her name she hadn't heard since the Red Waste, one whispered to her in half-truths by dying Dothraki, desperate traders, and long-dead letters, Jon Snow. And now, Rhaegar's son. They say he's taken the capital, Ser Jorah said as they descended the winding stairs. With the North and Dorne behind him, Daenerys stopped. Her voice didn't rise, but her silence was louder than Drogon's roar. "And what does he claim?" she asked. "Not the throne," Missandei said softly, "but peace." The word stung. Peace had never been Daenerys's path. Hers was forged in fire, bought in blood, earned through chains broken and cities burned. And now, someone else had claimed the realm without fire at all. But this wasn't just politics, this was personal. Jon Snow wasn't just a usurper, he was family. Wait, hold up. You're telling me that after all of Dany's journey, Astapor, Meereen, the crucifixions, the Unsullied, the Dothraki, some hidden heir walks into King's Landing and just takes it? Oh, no. This is where the story explodes. Back in King's Landing, the throne room had changed, no longer gold and crimson. The lion banners were torn down, replaced by a direwolf wrapped in flames. Not Targaryen, not Stark, but a new sigil representing unity, symbolizing a new claim. Jon stood before the Iron Throne but refused to sit. "I'm not a king," he told the assembled lords, "and I never wanted to be." But they kept kneeling anyway. Lords from the Vale, from the Reach, even some from the Westerlands disillusioned by the Lannister collapse. Word had spread of Jon's mercy, his honor, his refusal to spill Joffrey's blood when he could have. That changed hearts. And when Tyrion announced to the realm the truth of his birth, it did something no sword ever could. It created hope. But not everyone was hopeful. Arya stood in the shadows, watching Jon like he was a stranger. "You should have killed him," she muttered to Sansa. "He made the right choice," Sansa said. Arya's eyes stayed cold. Right doesn't win wars. And far across the sea, Daenerys sharpened her own sword of fire and blood. "You will write to him," she told Missandei. "Tell him I'm coming. Tell him I want peace. But do not let him forget who I am." The letter arrived at dusk. Jon read every word in silence. Then again, Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of Dragons, breaker of chains, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. "Requests an audience." Tyrion said what no one else dared. "She won't come alone." "She doesn't have to," Jon replied. But Ned Stark knew better. He pulled Jon aside. "You don't understand what she's lost," he said. "You were raised as a bastard. Hidden, she was hunted, burned alive by grief. She doesn't share. She conquers. She's my blood," Jon said. "So was Rhaegar, and look what his love cost. Now we've reached the most volatile alliance in Westeros. 2 Targaryens, one raised as a Stark, one forged in exile. Both rightful, both powerful, and both potentially doomed." Daenerys landed outside the gates with fire in her eyes. Drogon hovered like a storm cloud. The capital trembled again, not from war this time, but from possibility. The gates opened, and Jon walked out alone. No armor, no sword, just truth. Dany saw him for the first time, not as a threat, not as a soldier, but as kin. She didn't smile. "You have my throne," she said. "I didn't take it," Jon replied. "It was given." She stepped forward, the fire in her voice flickering into ice. "And if I ask for it back?" Jon paused. "You'll burn what's left of the realm trying to hold it." She looked past him, saw the city peaceful for the first time in decades. Children playing in the streets, soldiers laying down arms, bells ringing for unity, not surrender. She hated how much she wanted that too. "I came with fire," she whispered. Jon nodded. "Then you'll understand why I came with frost." And boom, that line. That's the turning point, because Dany doesn't strike. Not yet. She enters the city. She sees it with her own eyes. The small folk adore Jon, the council functions. Grain flows. Justice works, but the Iron Throne still burns in her mind. That night she meets Jon in the tower once used by Maegor the Cruel. They talk. And for the first time, they see each other not as rulers, but as lost children of a broken dynasty. "You're the only one left who knows how heavy the name Targaryen is," she tells him. "I never wanted it," he says, "but you wear it well. Their hands touch almost, but outside. Forces stir, 'cause remember who we forgot? Stannis, yup, the one who believes he is the rightful king." the one left to rot in the shadows after his defeat at Blackwater. He's been gathering what's left of his loyalists, and now, with all eyes on the Targaryens, he makes his move. Storm's End burns by moonlight, and his banner, Fiery Heart of the Lord of Light, flies again. Back in the capital, Dany feels it. The pull of chaos, and she turns to Jon. "Choose," she says. "Rule beside me, or watch me take it." Jon stays silent because in that moment, he doesn't know the answer, and neither do we. So what happens next? Does Daenerys strike first? Does Jon bend? Do the dragons burn the wolves? Or does Westeros finally find a way to survive its own blood? You tell me. If its own blood, you tell me. The night sky above Storm's End burned red with the wrath of the Lord of Light. Stannis Baratheon stood beneath a tattered banner bearing his sigil, his face half-shadowed by flickering flame. Smoke curled around the broken ramparts, and bodies of fallen garrisons littered the ground. The castle had fallen, not to honor, not to right, but to stubborn ambition backed by fire and faith. Melisandre's voice rang through the air like a funeral bell, chanting in High Valyrian as she cast the remains of slain enemies into the pyres. "The false kings will fall," she whispered to the flames. "The true king has returned." Stannis didn't smile. He never smiled. His jaw clenched as he stared into the fire, seeing not prophecy, but opportunity. "Tell the realm," he ordered. "Storm's End is mine again. I march north to take what belongs to me." But the realm wasn't watching him anymore. Not closely. Not yet. Because in King's Landing, two Targaryens stood across from each other in a room once soaked in dragonfire. The Iron Throne loomed behind them, silent and jagged, the scars of 1,000 claimants still etched into its cruel edges. Daenerys leaned against a pillar, her eyes scanning Jon as if trying to read a foreign script. "You were raised by wolves," she said, "but I can see the fire in your eyes, and I can see the ash in yours," Jon replied. Wait, what did he just say? Did Jon Snow just throw shade at Daenerys Targaryen? Yup, and the tension? You could cut it with Valyrian steel. But here's the twist. You expect her to strike. To burn, to roar, she doesn't. Instead, she smiles, just barely. "I thought I'd hate you," she said. "And?" "I don't." Jon said nothing. Because the truth was, he didn't hate her either. He understood her too well. They were both born of secrets, shaped by loss, tempered by war, and haunted by the same ghost, Rhaegar Targaryen. But their peace, it had an expiration date, because across the narrow sea a second raven had taken flight, this one bound for Essos. It carried the sigil of a lion, and the signature of Tyrion Lannister. The message was short. "Come now. Bring them." "Wait, what? Who is them? You ready for this?" Tyrion had brokered a deal with the Second Sons, and more importantly, with Daario Naharis. That's right. The man Dany left behind in Meereen was now on his way to Westeros, with 10,000 swords. And no loyalty to anyone but the Dragon Queen. But Tyrion wasn't just preparing for war. He was preparing for betrayal. Because the more Jon and Daenerys grew close, the more the small council began to whisper. 2 Targaryens meant 2 claims, 2 dragons, and eventually, one would have to fall. Back in the north, Sansa sat in Winterfell, her fingers laced tight as steel. "She's dangerous," she told Brienne. "She speaks of peace, but carries fire." "And Jon?" Brienne asked. "He's still listening with his heart," Sansa said. "And hearts don't win wars." Meanwhile, Arya had vanished again, southward, silent, watching, waiting. She had one name left on her list, Melisandre, and Arya never forgets a debt. You see where this is going? We're building toward the bloodiest collision Westeros has ever seen. 3 thrones claimed, 4 armies in motion, and 1 city trembling under the weight of too many kings. Jon Snow tried to stop the spiral. He met with Daenerys again, this time at the base of the Red Keep, overlooking the Dragon Pit ruins. "We could do this differently," he said. "How?" "Together." Daenerys looked out over the city, one she'd never ruled, one that feared her before they'd ever seen her. "You think they'll follow us both?" Jon nodded. "We don't need to rule. We need to heal," she turned. "You still think like a Stark, and that's why I survive." But peace wasn't written in the stars that night, because in the west, Roose Bolton and his men arrived. Not as allies, but as wolves dressed in gold. Tywin Lannister had promised them the north, and now they would take it, by fire, by knife, by betrayal. Winterfell burned again, not from wildlings, not from White Walkers, but from men. Sansa barely escaped. Brienne fought through 3 men to get her out. But the north, was lost again, and when word reached Jon, something broke in him. "Roose," he whispered. "He'll answer for it." Daenerys heard the pain in his voice, and for the first time she saw something in him that terrified her. Not weakness, but rage. He turned to her that night. "I'll ride north," he said. "And leave the capital?" "I never wanted it." She stepped forward, voice rising. "And if you die? Then burn them all." Boom, there it is. The Jon Snow we've never seen before. The one not trying to be noble, the one ready to unleash hell. Daenerys didn't stop. Him she mounted Drogon and followed. 2 dragons flew north that night, and behind them the realm shook because Tyrion stayed behind, and in the absence of Jon and Daenerys, he put a crown on his own head. "What?" "I told you this was coming. Tyrion Lannister. King in the capital. Temporary, of course. He claimed it was to maintain order. But the truth? He was done being a pawn. You want peace?" he said to the council. "Then you need a king who knows how to lie. And now the table is set. Jon and Daenerys ride north. Stannis marches from Storm's End. Arya hunts Melisandre. Tyrion plays his last card. And somewhere beyond all of them, the winds of winter begin to howl again. Because guess what's coming next? Because guess what's coming next? The snow came fast, riding the wind like a curse from the old gods. It blanketed the ruins of Winterfell in white silence, covering the blood, the ash, the shattered bones of the North's betrayal. Ghost prowled through the wreckage, his white coat stained red, his breath fogging in the bitter air. And then, through the falling snow, came footsteps. Jon Snow rode alone, no banners, no horn, just Longclaw at his side, and a fire burning behind his eyes that had nothing to do with dragons. Behind him came Daenerys, mounted on Drogon, wings stretched across the sky like a second coming of Balerion. Rhaegal circled overhead. Their arrival wasn't an army, it was a reckoning. They didn't come to retake Winterfell. They came to bury it. And those responsible? Rose Bolton, Ramsay. Their flayed banners still fluttered from the towers, mocking the direwolf sigil beneath it. No more. Jon stood before the gates, eyes fixed on the bodies of northerners hung from the walls. Sansa had escaped, but barely. Dozens hadn't. Children, old men, even loyal maesters. "I will kill them myself," he said to Daenerys, voice low, shaking with restraint. "You won't have to," she replied, stroking Drogon's neck. That night Winterfell burned again, but not from Lannister flames, from dragonfire. Rhaegal swept through the sky, burning the western towers. Drogon took the gate. Jon led the charge. Through the smoke, northern survivors rising from the crypts like ghosts come to reclaim their home. Rose Bolton didn't beg. He fought and he died, his head crushed by Jon's own hands. Ramsay tried to run. Arya found him first. "I remember your dogs," she whispered, just before she slit his throat with a smile colder than the snow. Winterfell was retaken. But something in Jon changed that night. He stood in the great hall looking at the burning tapestries, the shattered sigils, and saw not home, but the cost of mercy. He had let Rose live once. Let the North splinter. Let peace delay judgment. Never again. Meanwhile, far to the south, Tyrion sat on the Iron Throne, not as a king, not officially, but as a steward, a placeholder. He told the realm he waited for Jon and Daenerys to return, but in secret, he courted lords, bribed them, promised stability. He knew Dany wouldn't stop at Rose Bolton. He knew Jon's fire was no longer buried. He feared the return of dragons. So he laid his trap. He called upon the Golden Company, paid for with Lannister gold still buried beneath Casterly Rock. He raised the walls of King's Landing with new ballistae, and then he sent word to Essos, to a woman who hated Daenerys more than anyone alive, Yara Greyjoy. Wait, what? That's right. Yara, taken by Daenerys in the early days of her rise, cast aside when she refused to bend the knee. Tyrion offered her something no one else could, revenge, and she came fast with ships and fire of her own. Now the game changes again. Daenerys and Jon ride south, victorious in the north, but unaware that a second war waits. But here's where the story spins out of control. Because far beyond the wall, the snow isn't falling from clouds, it's falling from death. The Night King has returned, reborn, reforged, not with ice, with fire. You heard that right, because when Winterfell burned and Rhaegal bled from a dozen arrows, his fire mixed with something ancient beneath the crypts, something buried long before men built walls. A forgotten magic. The Night King doesn't march with zombies anymore. He rides a dragon, one born of flame and corpse, an undead beast with wings of shadow and a mouth of black fire. He's coming. Not from the north, from the east, from the sea. A power no one saw coming. Not Daenerys, not Jon, not Tyrion. And when he lands, it will not be for conquest, it will be for extinction. But back in King's Landing, the politics blind them all. Jon and Dany arrive to find Tyrion crowned protector of the realm. The Lords of the Reach and Westerlands gathered under one banner. And then, Varys dies, poisoned. His final words, "The realm doesn't care who's just, only who's left." Daenerys loses it. She orders Tyrion arrested. He laughs. "I warned you," he says. "They don't want peace, they want a leash." She turns to Jon, and for the first time he looks uncertain. "Do you believe in me?" she asks. "I believe in what we could have been, not what we are." That night, the council burns. Tyrion escapes. Sansa refuses to kneel. Arya threatens to kill Daenerys if she harms him. The dream collapses, and then the sky screams. The dead have come. Not walkers, not wights, something worse. Nightfire. The new Night King lands atop his dragon, eyes burning blue and red, magic leaking from his skin like cracked porcelain. He doesn't speak, doesn't send terms. He simply erupts. Black fire rains from the sky. The dragon pit explodes. The Red Keep splits down the middle. King's Landing becomes ash and ice all at once. Jon grabs Daenerys and runs. Arya vanishes. Tyrion, missing. The people burn. And just like that, the Game of Thrones ends. Because this is no longer about thrones. It's about survival. In the final moments, Jon faces the Night King in the ruins of the throne room. Drogon lies dead. Daenerys is wounded. Ghost limps through the snow, howling. And Jon knows he can't win, but he can end it. He plunges Longclaw into the Night King's heart and nothing happens. The Night King grins. Then Arya appears from behind. She doesn't stab him. She stabs Jon. Wait, what? Because Jon is the magic. Jon is the balance, Jon is the fire and the ice. And when he dies, so does the Night King. Both collapse, the flames vanish, the snow stops, and silence falls. Daenerys crawls to Jon's side. He's gone. Forever. The throne, melted. The city, gone. The realm, finally and free. She walks into the ashes, disappears. And Arya? She sails west to find a place with no kings, no gods, no fire, only peace. The game ends not with a crown, but with a girl walking toward the unknown, because sometimes the only way to win the Game of Thrones is not to play.